Hi, this is Todd Glass, and you're listening to Atheist Edge with your host, Jim Hall. Now here's Jim. Oh, Jim. All right, that's it. I'm losing my mind.
The article I was presented with gives 2014 data from Pew Research Center about the states that are the most religious. When looking for more accurate data, I noticed that while the states ranking in the top 10 highest for religiosity shift somewhat year to year, consistently we see the top states ranking along the Bible Belt. The World Population Review considers the following traits when ranking religiosity: religious attendance, frequency of prayer, belief in God, self-assessment of the importance of religion. And when considering those things, we found the following states to be the highest in religiosity. Those were Alabama and Mississippi at 77%, Tennessee, Louisiana, Arkansas, South Carolina, West Virginia, Georgia, Oklahoma, and finally North Carolina sitting around 65%. When reviewing the article I was given, it's showing the stats between states ranking high in religiosity and states ranking the worst in overall education. Again, for both, it's in the Bible Belt. The same states also have high instances of divorce rates, poor health, and poor access to health care, which leads to higher levels of health-related issues, lower wages, and more government assistance than seen in the national average. And it goes on. However, I disagree with the assumption the article seems to imply. Correlation is not always causation. So the question is, are more highly educated people less religious? Well, in 2017, the Pew Research Center published an article addressing just that. According to the report, the short answer is yes, and the long answer is it's complicated. Remember, over 70% of Americans express having a belief in a particular God. Those with higher education, and higher education being defined as a bachelor's degree or higher, are not less likely than others to attend religious services on a weekly basis. College graduates tend to be as religiously observant as those with less education, and in some cases more so. College graduates are less likely to work multiple jobs, leaving them more free time for religious activities. They also tend to have better access to transportation, especially when commuting from more rural areas than those that only have a high school degree or lower. There are a high number of people professing a faith in a specific God in every state. So for clarity, being more educated does not make one unreligious. The report shows that those with higher education are less likely to say religion is very important in their lives. It doesn't mean that religious isn't just important in their lives. After all, people don't spend a lot of time on things that they deem unimportant. People are raised to believe in a God, and they generally continue to do so until there's a meaningful break in that thought process. Some find this in the pursuit of a formal degree, but more do not. So why then are they saying it's complicated? So there's been a lot of arguments that have tried to address that. They range from socioeconomic factors to, the Southern strategy. What I find is more towards the socioeconomic. In the article, Education in the American South, found on the United States Department of Education website, the author noted that the conservative mindset, with a preference against big government, coupled with a strong church culture, could leave one feeling that church is all they need for support. Researchers in the study titled Red States, Blue States, and Media Literacy, published under Democracy in Education, suggested that children in southern states are less likely to be taught adequate critical thinking skills. In their study, they noted that red state teachers felt less comfortable offering ideas that were challenging to social norms for fear of upsetting parents, not being backed by their administration, and losing their jobs. This was not reported by teachers in blue states. Blue state teachers felt more comfortable challenging students on age-appropriate topics as long as the information was kept strictly factual. But before this comes too political, I want to digress. When looking over the research, it's not clear that more education makes people less religious, but that does depend on your definition of religious. Research tends to suggest that obtaining higher degrees makes one more liberal and open minded, which we already knew. In obtaining a higher degree, people are more likely to become more aware of the resources and ideas that promote a better quality of life. They're also more likely to advocate for more services for themselves and, by extension, those around them. For example, advocating for a program at their child's school that would benefit their child and, of course, the other students at the school and students for years to come, depending on, what the program is and how long it's implemented. Also, it's clear that the Bible Belt holds the nation's worst school systems. It's not clear that this is related to religion. There are many systemic and socioeconomic factors that need to be addressed that would still contribute to the state's remaining low performers, even if religion weren't a factor. We should, however, strive to keep education standards high. Higher educated people report higher levels of happiness, health, and tolerance of people with different beliefs. Thank you.
Around 25,000 kids under the age of 5 die frightened, hungry, and in pain every day. Remember that the next time you thank God for that Thanksgiving dinner, winning $500 on the scratch-off lottery ticket, or when your team wins the big game. This is an aspect of Christianity that I now facepalm over. How could I have been so blind? First is the fact that sharing prayer requests is more about gossip than anything else. You tell everyone someone else's problems and you are sharing the truth in love, so that everyone else can pray for them, of course. Near the end of my time as a believer, I got very frustrated with prayer time in Bible studies because we had about 20 minutes and people spent so much time talking about their prayer requests that we had little or no time to actually pray. And if we allocated more time or even spent the entire session, people just spent more time talking about their prayer requests. We did pray, but sometimes it was just, God, you know about this situation, please be with so-and-so. But the thing that has me face-palming is that no matter what happened afterward, we saw it as an answer to our prayers. If someone needed a job and got one, praise God. And if the prayer was unanswered, then God was telling you to be dependent on Him. And when I asked this very question, why are 25,000 children starving every day despite our prayers to the contrary, I was told that God's grace is sufficient for them. If they were believing children, they are now better off because they are in heaven with God. And if they are unbelieving children, well, we really didn't discuss this possibility. I like Vice Rhino's illustration on this point, and I am borrowing it. The God of the universe can't be bothered to cure a child's brain cancer, but He is concerned that you find your car keys, and He will help you find your car keys. When I ask believers to name one thing that they ever saw happen that could only be done by a God, I have only once ever had someone provide an answer. His answer was such a fantastic story that it would have made at least the local paper where he lived. So I asked him when and where this happened so I could look it up. He never did give me any dates or places. He just assured me that it really happened. It would be better if believers could be honest and admit that when they pray, nothing happens.
As punishment for the bondage of the Israelites, God ordered the Babylonian children to be smashed against the rocks. This made the Israelites very happy. From Psalm 137. So this is a psalm. There is a reference in the psalm to smashing children's heads against rocks, and that it would make the Israelites very happy. This is not, however, an explicit command from Yahweh. This is a psalm. This is a song, very clearly a lyric. This is associated with the exile of Judah into into Babylon, right? So again, from the history of the Hebrews, the history of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, and the kingdom of Judah, where it was placed, where it just happened to be, I should say, geopolitically, was right in between all these other major empires of the ancient world. You had the Egyptians on one side, you had the Assyrians over on this other side, you had the Babylonians and then the Persians over there, and then you had the Greeks and the rest of the sort of northern Mediterranean on the other side. And Palestine was sort of right in the middle, right? It never became big enough or dominant enough, despite what they like to tell themselves after the fact about Solomon. It was never a significant political power. The only thing that either the Israeli kingdom or the kingdom of Judah could hope to do was to ally itself with one of these other major powers. And for obvious political reasons, if you are the little small kid on the playground, you want to make sure that you are friends with the biggest kid who's going around beating everybody up, right? That just makes sense as a self-preservation, if nothing else. And so the history of Israel and Judah, and you can see this play out in First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, as they're sort of going back and forth. They're trying to reconcile this need politically to ally themselves with these other kingdoms, with the theology that is being advanced in this section of the Old Testament that says the only reason that we are still surviving in this environment is because we are worshiping Yahweh alone, and we are not dabbling with other gods. And there's a risk if you start aligning yourself too closely with these other empires, these other political powers in the area that have their own gods, their own mythologies, their own rituals, their own sacred calendars. If you align yourself with them, there'll be either some explicit expectation, or implicitly it'll just be easier to start worshiping their gods too, or add their celebrations to your calendar, sort of doing we'll do Christmas and Hanukkah and Ramadan sort of a thing, in a kind of an interfaith way, but not really. It's more just about political expediency for them. And so the concern, at least presumably among the priesthood, the Yahweh priesthood, the concern was, if you spend your time and your resources with these other gods, then we're not going to have as much for ourselves. And of course, they personified this as a concern of Yahweh's, not of their own, to fill their bellies. So they put sort of their own thoughts into Yahweh's mouth, and excoriated the Israelites, and excoriated the kingdom of Judah for dallying with other gods. And eventually, of course, this it didn't work out. They just played the wrong hand politically, and the northern kingdom was conquered and taken away by the kingdom of Assyria, and the southern kingdom of Judah was eventually conquered and not completely destroyed, but the leadership was taken away by the Babylonians, and so that's the exile. So the northern kingdom also had an exile that once they sort of go into exile, we don't hear from them again. So they're effectively off the page. But of course, they didn't go away. They just sort of, most likely, started mingling with the local populations and became indistinct from everybody else. But the priesthood, especially the leadership of the priesthood that was exiled in Babylon, made the decision that they wanted to preserve as much of their sort of past life as possible. It's debatable the extent to which they were actually able to do this. It seems very likely that they actually ended up doing the very thing that they were explicitly concerned about, and started mingling their ideas about God with the Babylonians' ideas about God. And that's why we have things like Genesis 1 that seems so similar to the Babylonian creation account. And the way that Yahweh is characterized is very similar to the way that the Babylonian god Marduk is characterized, etc., etc., etc. At any rate, there also was, as this was going on, a a real sense of loss and a feeling that that not necessarily that Yahweh has abandoned them unnecessarily, but that they're receiving sort of a just punishment for what they had done previously, sort of, you know, not sticking as close as they possibly could to exclusive worship of Yahweh. So they kind of had what was coming to them, and that is a theme that goes throughout the prophets, is that Yahweh's going to punish you, and you are going to deserve it when it happens. That being said, even though they deserve the punishment, and they kind of agree with that, they also, it doesn't let the Babylonians off the hook, right? So even though Yahweh used the Babylonians to conquer Judah and drag them off into exile, they're still evil people because they don't worship Yahweh, right? If they worshiped Yahweh and they followed His laws and everything like that, then everything would be fine. But they don't. So even though they're tools of Yahweh, they still worship false gods, and so that makes them by default evil. And so that, coupled with the very understandable resentment that the Jewish leadership and the priesthood had at being taken away into exile, leads to this particular poem. So this is Psalm 137, and it's a lament. It's a lament psalm. And I'll read through the entirety of it just so that you can get a sense of the whole context and the sadness that is all the way through it, right up until the end, when there is a very kind of shocking passage that sort of culminates and summates all their frustration and anger at the Babylonian people. So here's Psalm 137. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing Yahweh's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth, if I do not remember you. If I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Yahweh, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall he be who repays you with what you have done to us. Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. So this is a song. The context of it, clearly these are, it's presenting the point of view of a musician, probably a sacred musician, someone who played songs associated with rituals and liturgy with the Yahweh cult back in Palestine, and they are now in exile because they were associated with the cult, and so they've been exiled. They're no longer allowed to be in their homeland. They have to be in Babylon now. And the people there, the Babylonians who are in charge of them, kind of make fun of them for being exiled and say to them, oh, why don't you sing us one of those old-time religion songs from the good old days of Judah, right? So it's I don't know exactly how the Babylonians might have taken it, whether they actually were mocking them or whether they were just sort of curious. Oh, we'd love to hear one of your songs. There's a kind of a fine line between curiosity about another culture and then just sort of mocking it, as we well know. But certainly the way it was taken by these sacred musicians was that this was a mocking thing. And even if it wasn't intended that way, it hurt. It reinforced the idea that they were no longer able to play these songs, these very important sacred songs that were part of the Yahweh cult. They couldn't do it anymore. What's the point of playing songs to Yahweh in a foreign land where Yahweh is not in charge, right? So this is also an idea that's sort of baked into this, that there's a certain piece of land, a certain geography where Yahweh is king, and in other geographies, other countries, Yahweh is not king. And so what's the point of actually continuing these rituals in a place where Yahweh isn't a ruler, right? 'Cause it doesn't make any sense. It's like it's like moving to France and becoming a French citizen and then still paying taxes to the United States. It's just kind of stupid. And this, of course, precedes the concept of God that existed later, that posture that God was not just a local God, that Yahweh was not just a local God, but Yahweh was, in fact, the God of everyone, the high God. And so the high God deserves respect everywhere, right? So that's a later development of the God concept. And that's why they can't sing the Song of Zion in Babylon, not just because they're bitter about it, but because it would make there's no point. Yahweh couldn't hear it. You know, we're so far away from Zion, the mountain of Yahweh, on top of which he lives, that he wouldn't be able to hear the song even if we played it here for our Babylonian captors. And so their frustration in that of being separated from their ancestral homelands, of being separated from their religious context, of having their sort of religious identity mocked, or presumably mocked, or the way it was taken was as mockery, results in tremendous frustration. And so they, at the very end of the song, they start imagining the repercussions. Like, one of these days you're going to get what's yours. And so they call it the Edomites, because the Edomites played a role in the Babylonian conquering of Jerusalem. So they call it the Edomites, and they also call the Babylonians, and they say, yeah, they do imagine at some point some conquering army coming in and smashes the Babylonian babies to death against rocks, and they do take some joy in that. But it's a bitter kind of a joy. It's kind of an understandable kind of a joy that does come from that particular circumstance. But I don't think we should take it as a commandment of Yahweh that people should go around smashing babies to death on stones and celebrate it.